So Elon Musk is the richest person.
On the planet? I don't know.
Let's check it out.
I'd believe that.
He's certainly the richest known person on the planet.
That's very true.
There are some people out there who think that there are trillionaires, but that they are very successful in burying their wealth
Mm.
in other things. We're not ready to start yet. We'll be right back.
Hey, move your car.
Oh.
Quickly.
We interrupt this program too.
That's the first you
I thought for sure no one was going to leave once I got
Forbes just updated an hour ago.
So what?
So Forbes just updated an hour ago, and Musk is number one, 439. Bezos 2 at 237.
here.
Larry Ellison at 213. Mark Zuckerberg at 205.
Where's Buffett?
Buffett is 8 at 140.
Eight.
He got bumped down.
No, bumped way down. I didn't realize he was doing. I didn't realize he was doing so badly.
Old man.
I think I said on the podcast a couple of weeks ago he was number 3 in the world.
He might have been a couple weeks ago.
Yeah.
Yeah, number 8.
That's disturbing to me that Zuckerberg is that much money. That's not surprising, but
It's kind of weird though.
yeah.
He's into jiu-jitsu now, so we have to support him.
No, we don't. Kick his ass.
Yeah, I'd be curious. I think he's a mid-level blue belt. Yeah.
A lot of people I don't recognize on here.
Wait, are we still live?
Yeah.
I'm
trying to bring in the authentic feeling.
The authentic feeling of what it really is to be on a show. So, welcome, Karl.
Thank you.
That's good to have you, man.
Good to be here.
It's been
We've talked about it for a while.
we've talked about it for a while. It takes a while to get all the ducks in a row, all the poop in a group.
Indeed,
Yeah.
they say.
As is said, not by liberal artists, of course. So, what's new on the core side of things these days?
What's new? I mean,
You guys have the most number of trips booked
Yep.
for the coming year.
yep.
What's
just
that
a
number
little
at, like 121?
It's something around there. I think last year we had 115. This year we're right around 120. I don't know the exact number, but I think we're just over last year. So we've continued the trend of increasing our number of trips every year.
Yep.
Which is always good. Definitely slowing down though, trying to make sure that we're growing our staff appropriately.
The rate of expansion is slowing down.
The rate of expansion is slowing down.
Right.
Yes.
Right. If you have 12 trips, it's easy to double it.
Very.
If you have 120 trips, it's harder.
A lot harder to double it. Yeah.
Yeah.
But we also found that just in terms of like staff retention and burnout, it's really hard to keep quality people for long periods of time. So we're trying to increase our staff kind of for a twofold reason, so that we have to use outside folks and adjuncts less, but also so that our staff don't burn out as much.
Right.
And we're able to retain those quality folks.
What's the number one cause of burnout?
I don't know. I think everyone's a little different. We're still small enough that we don't have a ton of data on that. Yeah, I think everyone's a little bit different. My instinct, my best guess would be community.
Community.
Or lack of community.
Lack of community.
So when I was in the field, one, it felt like there were just fewer young adults in Lander at the time. And this was only like I started seven or 8 years ago. So for the 3 or 4 years that I was in the field full time, it felt like there were fewer young adults in town, but that might have also been because I was just gone so much.
Gotcha.
I was in the field anywhere. I mean, the first couple of years when we only had like 12 trips, I was only in the field like 12 weeks out of the year. In the last couple of years when we had 50 to 70 trips, I was in the field 20, 30 weeks out of the year.
Okay.
Which is like more than half. So basically every other week you're gone. really hard to have any sort of solid community because everything's moving and progressing and changing while you're gone. You get back, try to pick up where you left off, and you're like, so much happened on my last trip. You guys weren't there for that. I wasn't here for what happened here. And it just takes a lot of effort every time.
Right.
And after doing that 50 times, you kind of are like, all right, that's enough.
Just do me a favor, brother, and just
Sorry,
swing that.
move the mic a little closer.
Yeah, yeah, that should be. In fact,
Okay,
just a
can you-
couple more inches, right to the edge, right there. It should be
There we
good.
go. Okay.
Mhm. Yeah,
That will do.
yeah. That way we'll just have fewer balancing issues when we actually go to publish. So,
Sounds good.
you are not in the field to that level
No,
or even close to it at this point.
these days I'm in the field probably about 10 weeks out of the year.
10 weeks out of the year.
Mhm.
How many years have you spent in the backcountry over the course of your life?
I'd have to look at it. I haven't really looked back into my younger days. I haven't counted most of the time I spent in the Boy Scouts outside or just like fun family trips before I was a teenager. But since coming to college and counting, I think my senior year of high school, I did go back and like write all those down. I'm close to 3.5 years,
Wow.
which is about 170 weeks, 180, 170, 180.
Mm-hmm.
I don't remember exactly. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
That's great.
A bit. A bit.
That's funny to think about if you did that all that sequentially.
That'd be wild.
Imagine if you were 3.5 years without
Mm-hmm.
televisions, restaurants, movie theaters, highway driving.
That would be kind of awesome.
Mm.
But also, yeah.
When you
Yeah.
strap on the backpack,
Mhm.
head out onto the trail, do you feel like you're going home? What's that feeling in the first 20
Mhm.
minutes?
Well, it's changed a little bit for sure. Since getting married, since having kids, it doesn't really feel that way anymore.
Gotcha.
Home is definitely where my family is.
Mm-hmm.
There definitely is like a level of comfort that I have in the backcountry that it doesn't feel like I'm going to a foreign place. It doesn't feel like I, yeah, I've never been a professional athlete or even like a collegiate athlete, but I imagine it's kind of similar to that of like, it's like stepping out onto the field where you're just like, this is where I go to work.
This is where I go to work
Yeah.
and where I really
Where I
know
thrive.
what to
Yeah.
do.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I just read a article by David Foster Wallace.
Mhm.
Have you read any of him?
I have not.
He's
Not familiar with him at
excellent.
all.
His essays about tennis really are
Okay.
quite memorable.
Okay.
He did this profile on a professional tennis player. This was probably in the mid 90s.
Mhm.
And he's profiling this guy who is ranked number 79 in the world,
Ooh, okay.
which you might read that
Impressive, yeah.
79 in the world. Like, pff. But then Wallace makes the very good point of, have you ever been in the top 100
Of anything?
of anything? You probably haven't.
Yeah, no. No.
So he said, do you know the sheer amount of will, effort, and sacrifice it takes to be in the top 100 in anything?
And time.
And time.
Yeah.
But he was interviewing the guy, and this young man said, if I'm in a bar and I see a really pretty girl, I
Yeah.
might be really nervous to go talk to her.
Mhm.
But he said, conversely, if I'm out on the tennis court, there might be 100 gorgeous women in the stands watching me, but I don't feel nervous at all
Mhm.
because I am where I know what to do.
Yeah.
It sounds like the outdoors is that environment for you.
Yeah. Most of the time. Most of the time, there's
Maybe
still
not audiences of 100 gorgeous women wandering about the hills.
that would probably make me uncomfortable. But I would leave that situation like something's gonna do something. Someone's gonna do something dumb. Um, yeah. And that's kind of the thing though too, is that like that is where I feel like I know what to do most of the time. But I also very intentionally choose the environments that I go into. Right. Like I don't do a whole lot of backcountry skiing because I'm not super comfortable doing avalanche predictions of like, and now even though most of that you can look up online before you go and you just gotta like kind of go out and do it. I don't have the experience to like go out and read conditions that way. Um, I do a little bit of biking and I do a bit of climbing, but I don't do a ton of that. Partly because most of my experience is backpacking. Um, partly because bikes just scare me. Um, but yeah, like no, I'm very just particular about what I do in those environments. So even within like the outdoor field, it's such a broad range of things. There's definitely it is true to say that that is where I'm comfortable. That is where I know what to do. But I also kind of know the boundaries of like what I know and where that applies. So that makes a difference as well.
Would you say backpacking is your favorite outdoor?
It depends. It depends on what you mean by favorite. I definitely do the most of that, and I definitely think that it is the most efficacious for what we're trying to do. Right. So Core Expeditions is all about teaching leadership, but even beyond that, it's about encountering Christ.
Mhm.
And so backpacking is kind of the place where people can have an experience where they're pushed outside of their comfort zone, but then they can learn quickly how to be in that place. Of it's a relatively low skill thing. So you have the experience of like gaining some degree of mastery in it relatively quickly and feeling comfortable in it, um, which allows you to be there and to no longer be in sort of that panic zone. So I think it's the most efficacious both for learning leadership and for building community and encountering Christ.
Mhm.
Um, it is not always the most fun.
Ah,
I probably would say right now it's what I've been doing the most, so it's what I'm most comfortable at the moment. I kind of go through
Specifically backpacking, you
backpacking
mean?
specifically. Yeah, I kind of go through seasons. Sometimes like rock climbing is my favorite thing. When I'm doing that and kind of like in that zone, sometimes canyoneering is my favorite thing.
mm,
Um, but right now, what I've been doing the most is backpacking for the last couple of years. So that's definitely like my comfort zone. Yeah, and the other one's like uh, I know all the things, but there's a physicality to it that makes it like okay, I have to get back into this shape again.
right.
Um, and also particularly with rock climbing, there's such a mental aspect of it as well. Like you have to keep that edge sharp, otherwise it'll just mess with your head. If you so I started climbing because I'm afraid of heights. I started climbing because I'm afraid of heights,
Ah,
and I was like, I don't want to let that stop me from
Hmm.
doing things.
uh-huh.
So I started climbing and finding that place where my mind was like, this is a lot, this is a lot, and being like, just getting the practice in of shutting that voice down and being like, no, I know it's okay. Like I know the systems. I know I've done everything correctly. If I fall, it might hurt, but I'm gonna be okay. Um, and like that built up that mental habit of kind of like acknowledging the fear and being like, not today. Like you're not gonna stop me.
Mm,
But that's a habit that if you don't continually practice, you lose. And so if I haven't climbed for a couple of months and I start climbing again, those fears kind of like come back louder. Like,
Yeah.
oh gosh. And just kind of like as you're climbing, I do mostly sport climbing. As you're climbing above your bolt, you know, like if I fall right now, it's going to be 10, 20,
It's going to
25 foot
be
drop.
my
Yeah.
rope length times two.
Yep. Yep. Above the last bolt and then like the stretch. And you're like, all right, that's a lot. And it can get in your head until you like regain that habit and sort of that mastery, that mental space to be like, yep, if I fall, it's gonna be okay.
Gotcha.
Yeah. Yeah.
I've been dealing with that this summer with my mountain biking. There's this
Mm,
one feature over
yeah.
on the jump track,
Hmm.
which I just hate it.
Yeah.
I hate it. And I spent a month basically just going to the top of the drop and just trying to psych myself to, I can do this. And then I'd go home and then I'd come back the next day and I'd go up to the top and I'd try to psych myself into it. And I'd just have to give myself the space to say, I'm not ready for it today and
Yep.
go home. And then one day I just was, right?
Yeah.
And I went in and I dropped the feature and rode home, was super happy and thought, great, I've conquered that fear. And then went back 2 days later and I was almost as afraid of it as the first time. And I remember thinking,
Yeah.
Dang
I
it.
did this.
Right, exactly. Like I did this. Didn't I prove
Yeah.
this to myself? Didn't
Yeah.
I slay this dragon?
Mhm.
How did this dragon resurrect itself and come back to bite me?
It does.
So I did it again. And I came
Yeah.
back a couple days later and I did it again.
Mhm.
And then there was one day, this was probably my best day. I did it twice in a row. Like I dropped the feature,
Mhm.
rode the circle, came back, dropped it again.
Mhm.
And so I was like, okay, now I
Yeah.
really got it.
Yeah.
Sure enough, a couple of weeks later, I thought I got to go drop that feature again because I'm scared of it again.
Yep.
Right.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I just did it.
Yeah.
Let's see, it's December now. So I probably did it in November, like right after Thanksgiving. Just one last time. We had a nice
Nice.
sunny day.
Nice.
But I just know that come spring, when the course dries out again, I'm going to have to go out and hit it again.
Yep.
And who knows? Maybe it'll just be the feature that is just always sort of a craw in my system.
Yeah. And maybe it means like maybe the way to slay that one is to do more extreme things,
It might be.
which I'm not necessarily advocating. Yeah,
All right, we all have responsibilities.
totally.
I'm guessing that you dislike heights the way I dislike unmanaged speed.
Probably.
Yeah.
I also don't like unmanaged.
You don't like to
That's-
just go fast.
No, that's why I don't like bikes.
Uh-huh.
It's like I'm fine on my feet and kind of being in control. As soon as you add either a mechanical advantage or gravity,
Mhm.
like this is fast and I could get really hurt.
Right, I could really get myself wrecked.
Yeah,
Interesting.
yeah.
So what's the appeal of canyoneering then?
Well, canyoneering isn't really high speed.
Uh-huh.
That's another one.
So you don't deal with, I mean, but it can
Yeah.
have a claustrophobic
It
element.
definitely can. I don't have an issue with claustrophobia.
Okay.
To my knowledge, I've never experienced that, and I've been in some tight canyons and some tight caves.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, heights for sure, and that's something I struggle with as part of that as well. So it is kind of similar to rock climbing. There is always that kind of like gut check anytime you go over the edge,
Mm-hmm.
and the transition from like standing on your own feet to touching, like to trusting the rope system,
Mm-hmm.
is always always kind of a sinking feeling in your stomach.
Yep.
Yeah, the moment you lose that, I don't know. That's the moment you kind of die inside a little bit. But that part's always there. I enjoy canyoneering because it's like play.
Okay.
You go there and every canyon's different. Everyone has different obstacles. It's like being a kid again in a jungle gym. And you're like, but this is an adult sized challenge. Like I can run through a jungle gym and kind of be, and like mostly be bored.
Mm-hmm.
Unless you're trying to do like the Ninja Warrior or whatever. But it's like you get through a canyon and sometimes you have to like climb up and over a boulder. Sometimes you have to like fit through this squeeze. Sometimes you have to like stem on sides of the wall. Sometimes like the whole canyon is tilted and you have to like kind of like do a half push up every time you move as you're like trying to move sideways and your feet can't touch the bottom because it's too narrow. And just all kinds of different things. Like every turn is a new challenge. And there are like the ones that we do the most commonly are down in Utah, kind of in the middle of the desert. So there's hardly anybody there. They're small, dry sandstone canyons, and so a lot of the places you could use a rope to rappel down, and that would be like the safe route. But a lot of places, like you can just climb down, and you have to figure out how to do that and use your body and use the rock, and it's just fun.
Interesting.
It's just fun and physical. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, so it's that really sweet overlap, I should say, between a mental challenge and a physical challenge.
Yeah. Yeah. Definitely.
Right.
Definitely.
Yeah.
It just engages
Physical
you.
chess.
A little bit. And every canyon's a little bit different. So some are a little more mental, some are a little more physical.
Mm-hmm.
For sure. And then you go places like Zion's got a lot of water in their canyons. Some of them are dry, but some of them have a lot of water. And so that adds like another layer to the challenge. Of like maybe you're in a wetsuit and that kind of restricts your movement, but also those canyons are mostly deep enough that they never get sunlight. So
It's cold.
it might be 90 degrees outside and you're dropping into 60-degree water.
Right.
And it's 60 degrees sounds not too bad, but when it's water, it's freezing.
Sure.
Yeah.
That also puts a time limit on it, right? I mean, you
Sort of,
can't be
yeah,
out there
yeah.
at night.
You could if you had the right gear.
Okay.
but you wouldn't want to be if you weren't like wearing a dry suit for
Hmm.
sure, for sure. But it also makes it so fun, and the ones with water are even more fun because the water levels change, and that totally changes the canyon. Like there's one canyon in Zion that I absolutely love to do, and there's always water in it. But one year I did it right after a rainstorm, so it was totally full. So typically there's like that particular canyon has like 5 or 6 pools, and only once do you have to swim, or I have to swim because I'm pretty tall. Um, this time, the section of canyon that was technical, so from the first rappel to the last rappel, is only about half a mile long, maybe 3/4 of a mile long. We probably had to swim a quarter mile. So half of the canyon I couldn't touch.
Mm-hmm.
And that added a huge physical aspect to it and mental. Because I was taking a group through a group of 6, I think, and one of them couldn't swim.
Oh no.
Yeah, yeah. So
Group
like,
of 5.
oh, it was really great. Like we didn't realize that she couldn't swim until like like the middle of it when she actually went under. Because before that she hadn't been able to like kind of stem on the walls, and kind of make her way. And she could kind of doggy paddle, but she was not a good swimmer and just got fatigued and slightly hypothermic, and just could not keep herself above water anymore.
Mhm.
So I ended up like jumping back in the water, grabbing her, and it wasn't crazy deep, so I was able to literally like hold her above my head, and walk on the ground. Like my head was underwater, but she was out,
Mm.
and it was only for like 10 seconds. I took like 5 steps, and then I could like breathe again. Um, but after that, it was like, all right, we need a new strategy for getting everyone out of this cave, and it needs to happen soon.
Wow.
Or not cave, canyon.
Canyon.
Yeah, yeah. And so from like after that, what we started doing was anytime we came to water, I had my backpack, I had a rope, and I stacked the rope in the backpack so that they could hold on to the end of it, my group, while I swam across, and it would feed out of the backpack nicely. So I would swim across, they would hold on to the rope, spread out along the rope, and I would just pull them through the water
Mm.
as they were going. Um, and that kind of made it so they didn't really have to swim because the speed of their movement kind of like kept them up. And they would kick with their feet, and that helped. And they all helped each other. Yeah, it was really great. I think we had a first aid kit that had a waterproof bag on it, so we kind of like filled that with air, kind
Yeah.
of like put that under her armpits, and it
I
kept her
swam
head out of the water.
I swam across a lake in Guatemala using I took my
Yeah.
waterproof bag and just flapped it in the air and then rolled it to seal it.
Yeah, yeah.
And that was my improvised buoy
Mm-hmm.
as I
Mm-hmm. No.
as I swam across this lake.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I do remember being halfway across and then bobbing and looking back to where I'd come from and looking to where I needed to go and thinking distances are much greater when you're in the middle of the lake than when you're standing on the shore looking
Yeah,
across, right?
yeah, yeah. And part of that is you're like 6 feet lower.
Right. You're 6 feet lower and your body is starting to say, there's a reason we walk
Oh,
places,
yeah. Yeah, for sure.
not paddle.
For sure.
Yeah, I slept very well that night.
I believe it.
I was
believe it.
bushed.
Yeah, yeah.
Oh.
How far was it?
To be honest with you, I'm not a great swimmer. It wasn't that far.
Not many people are good swimmers.
Yeah, that's very true. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. What when was the last time you were out in the backcountry and the thought crossed your mind, this might be my last day on Earth?
I haven't had many of those.
That's
Um,
good.
yeah. I think I can think of 2 times, and one was a little more prolonged. The other one was definitely like an oh shit moment that passed
Hmm.
like very quickly. Um, the first one was climbing the Grand Teton. Um, yeah, that was a while ago. But climbing the Grand Teton, we were on our way up. For some reason, I decided not to wear climbing shoes. It was like we were on an easy route. It was only 5-7 or something.
Hmm.
But me and my buddy decided we were just going to wear, and we were following. Like we weren't leading, so we didn't have to. The rope was there to hold us. But as we were going up, it started to snow.
Hmm.
So there was definitely a moment, a moment in time where I was like, all right, snow just kind of made this get real.
Yeah.
Of like,
This
Yeah, yeah. And coupled with
This
that,
is no
we were
longer
on
a jaunt.
yeah. And coupled with that, we were on a section where it was just this narrow fin of rock that we were going up. And so you look 4 feet to your right and you can see 1,000 feet down. And you look to your left and it's just a straight cliff wall with nothing to hold on to.
Hmm.
And when you look down, it's like 500 feet down that way. So you're like, all right, this is pretty real right now.
Yeah.
And even though I was tied to a rope, I was like, all right, there's a real chance that this could end badly.
And you were
Thankfully, the
just
chance is
in
low. Yeah.
just hiking boots,
I was
basically.
just in hiking boots. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
As opposed to
still had my harness, helmet, rope, all the good, like all the correct gear. There was no way I was going to fall. Well,
in theory.
I could have fallen, but as long as the gear held, it would have been fine.
Mm-hmm.
But like you can tell yourself that 1,000 times, but your brain still thinks like if I fall, I'm going to go all the way down.
Yeah.
And you're looking at a 4,000-foot drop on one side.
About 1,000.
1,000.
Yeah. Yeah.
Still enough to kill you.
Oh, definitely. Yeah. Yeah. And the second time I was being stupid. I was rappelling off of a feature in the Utah desert. And we were at the top waiting for a group ahead of us to go down. And this couple came up and we were on this just like big rock in the middle of the desert. And there were a few places where you could rappel off. And everyone wants to go through this one little narrow section because it's really kind of cool. And you rappel into an overhung kind of like cave area. And there's an arch in the rock and it's really neat. But because everyone wants to go there, there's of course going to be a traffic jam.
Mm-hmm.
So my group was waiting to go down through there. This couple comes up and they're like, "We don't really care. We just want to get down." So I was like, "Great, there's an anchor over here." And I showed them the anchor and they were kind of like standing around chatting for a while. They're like, "Do you know if a 60-meter rope goes?" And I was like, "I honestly don't. I know a 70 goes, but I don't know if a 60 will go." And the anchor was kind of like back away from the edge, so they couldn't just like put the ropes through and then go look over the edge. You couldn't see, so you had to like rappel partway down to the edge to go look over. So they had just put their rope through without any knots, so it was just like through two rings and a chain.
Yep.
So I did like an auto block because I had been doing that all summer. But I did it with the wrong sized carabiner. And so generally the way you do that is you tie a carabiner into your rope on a clove hitch,
Mm-hmm.
and then you rappel on the other side of the chains from that. So your weight pulls the carabiner into the chain, and the carabiner doesn't fit through the chain.
Sure.
I used the wrong size carabiner.
That could fit through the chain.
So not through a chain, but through a big ring.
Right.
So I'm going over the edge, and the carabiners are pear shaped. So they're wider at one end than at the other. So when I first get on, I don't think anything of it because like the weight is holding it at the narrow end. It's clearly not going to fit through. As I'm going down, I'm kind of like taking steps, and it's bouncing. And so right when I get to the edge, it slips through. And
So it's going clink, clink.
Well, it
clink.
wasn't even clink. It was like the bounce of the rope was just kind of holding, and
Yep.
then so I didn't even hear a clink. It just slipped. So
My God.
I didn't hear a thing. I fell probably 50 feet. And what stopped me was the other end of the rope hadn't been flaked properly. It was just kind of like thrown down in a coil, and so the rope literally knotted itself, and the knot got stuck in the ring.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
But if it had been flaked
If it
properly,
didn't flake properly, I would have hit the ground.
which was how far away?
Another 60 or 70 feet.
So that might have been it.
That might have been it. I had that moment as I was falling of like, this is how I die.
Just because someone hadn't flaked the rope properly.
Yeah, saved my life. Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
unreal.
Yeah. Yeah. And it was definitely a learning experience of being like, God loves me today, like this, like he's got something in store for me. Otherwise I would have been dead today.
Yeah.
Yep.
Right.
And-
Yeah.
and-
A fall
and
of
like-
100 feet onto rock. Yeah.
Yeah. No.
That's it.
Odds were very low
Mm-hmm.
of survival from that. But yeah. And ever since then, like anytime I get on a rappel, I'm like double, triple, quadruple checking my anchors ever since.
Mm-hmm.
And I still just have like that gut reaction. and I like have to push it aside every time of like, I've checked this 15 times. I know the gear is good, but there's still that little voice in the back of my mind that goes kind of, but what if the rope breaks?
Right.
Like it's rated to 6,000 pounds.
Hmm.
It's not gonna break.
Right.
But what if it breaks?
But what if it breaks? Yeah.
Yeah. And it's just for like
What
the
if there was a
first-
flaw in the manufacturing?
something, yeah, yeah. And you're like, well, you can't control that. Yeah, I don't want to live a life of fear.
Sure. I remember coming off a climb, and so I had to I was cleaning the route. So I went up to the top, took the rings off. So then just transferred everything to the mussy hooks.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know if maybe I had a little too much tension when I was trying to get my rope onto the mussy hooks, or if they were just maybe misaligned or something.
Yeah.
But as I started to go down, one of the mussy hooks let go of the rope.
Oh,
So I like
good thing
dropped
there's
6.
two.
Yeah, exactly. I dropped 6 inches because it slipped out of the mussy hook. So, whatever was on that second hook
Yeah.
let me go. So I just had this quick fall, and then I looked back and I was only on by one mussy.
Woo.
And I remember the same reaction,
Yeah.
thinking, wow, if that had been the one piece of gear I was on, I would have fallen. It was like I would have bounced down a 300-foot cliff. I would have been dead.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you're dead.
Yeah.
That's it.
That dead might be a better case than crippled for life.
Right.
Maybe. Yeah.
Yeah.
Who can say ultimately?
Who can
what's better?
say? Well,
That would
I
be
mean,
hard.
honestly, you and I probably
That'd be
both know
hard.
some people who can actually comment on that, because here in Lander, there are some guys who have
Taking big
lived
falls,
through some pretty ripper falls,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And just basically had every bone in their body rebuilt
Mhm.
over time. There was a guy who was, God, I don't even know if he's still here in town, to be honest.
Mhm.
But yeah, he was in jiu-jitsu,
Mhm.
big time climber. And then he was coming down from a route and his rope was too short. So his belayer just belayed him right off the end of the rope. Yeah. So I don't think he didn't even fall that terribly far, but still, I mean, just,
Broke everything. Yeah.
yeah, broke everything. Yeah.
On the converse of that, I was watching a video the other day about this gal who jumped out of an airplane and her parachute and her backup chute didn't deploy.
Jeez.
So she fell like 1,000 feet
Uh-huh.
and somehow lived, like with her um parachuting instructor landing on top of her.
What?
Whoa.
Yeah.
I'm telling you, man, it's aliens. These are
Weird. It's weird.
These are the aliens that are on Earth.
Yeah. There's
Yeah.
also a story of a chaplain in World War II jumping out of an airplane and having his chute not deploy. And I think the story is that he fell close to 10,000 feet,
Mm-hmm.
which 10,000 feet doesn't really matter. You're not going any faster at that point.
You've
You
achieved
just
terminal
have
velocity.
a lot longer time to think about what's going to happen.
Right. Think about all the mistakes you've made in life.
Yeah.
How did she survive? I mean, did she?
Don't know.
Does anyone? I mean,
And sometimes they would make, like, for a longer one, they would probably make 2 trips.
Yep.
But they would do both those trips in a day.
Yep.
So you're talking like 30 miles of hiking with 180 pounds or even 90 pounds in a day.
Yep.
But yeah, so this guy's like, yeah, typically guys carry 2 pounds, like 2 bales. But I carry 4 because I'm pretty strong.
Oh,
Just like, what?
yeah,
And you're like, oh my gosh.
I carry 4. Yeah.
And just like,
wow.
and that's it. And then he moves on to talking about what it's like.
Those guys must have had basketball calves.
Basketball calves, and they're all like, honestly, they're also all probably like 5'2", which lends itself to that kind of work.
Sure.
It would be a lot harder for someone who's my frame, being like over 6 foot, to carry that much weight because there's just so much more leverage in my spine.
Sure.
It would take a heck of a lot more core stability than for
Mhm.
someone who's shorter.
Yeah.
That being said, it is still incredibly impressive.
Right.
Like, I don't know I don't know any 5 foot tall people who could do that.
That's
It's amazing.
bananas.
Yeah. And so obviously they're people who are freaks of nature. And even that guy seems to have been one in his time. But even 180 pounds is impressive.
Mm-hmm.
I've carried a 120-pound pack before. And
Mhm.
that was backbreaking.
Yep.
That was backbreaking. I made it like 2 miles. Of like, I'm done.
Yep. This is not fun.
Yeah. on relatively flat terrain,
Uh-huh.
like not a lot. Yeah, it's brutal.
Wow.
It's brutal.
Yeah, those people must have been strong.
Yeah, and I've
Just every part of
yeah,
them.
I've put a 200-pound pack on my back, and I thankfully haven't had to carry it very far.
Uh-huh.
It sucks.
Yep. Man,
Yeah,
could you get used to it? That's yeah.
probably if you had to,
If you had to.
if you had to. But that's what I'm saying. They did.
Hmm.
That was normal life.
Right.
Not for everyone,
Not for everyone.
and that was like, and that was only in the 17 and 1800s.
Hmm.
Not that long ago.
Oh, I doubt the genetics have changed that much. It's just the
The mind.
the mental expectation, and also the fact that
Yeah.
in a certain way you were training for it from childhood,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
You were doing
Mm. Yeah.
lots of very physical things from
Mhm.
an early age.
Yeah.
And so,
Yeah.
yeah, you were sort of preparing for it your whole life.
Mm-hmm.
I'm also guessing that those guys did not do it for that many years, right?
No,
Yeah.
no, they did not. They did not. I think 10 years was a long time.
10 years was a long time. I'm guessing most of them
To
did
do
it
that.
5 or 6 years.
Yeah,
And then they
Probably.
got on to something else
probably, or died.
or died. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
funny. Dave's grandfather, he was stout.
Yeah.
He was a stout guy.
Yeah.
Right. Why can't I be built like that? Oh,
Dude.
500-pound, 55
Gallon drum.
gallon drum.
4
Yeah.
people pickup.
Yeah. That's depending what's in it. That's
Crazy.
between 450 and 550 pounds.
Yep.
So you're grabbing it and you're just,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I cannot imagine.
yeah. That's like strongman. That's like strongman level.
Well, that's the thing though too. It's like
Fitness.
it's an odd object.
Very
So even strongman, I think most of them would struggle with it.
Sure.
No. No.
Well,
And those guys are on all kinds of drugs.
yeah.
They're on the
Yeah.
gear.
Yep. Yeah.
Make me, there's this old well, so his name's Alexander Zaz, and he was a Russian strongman in World War II.
Dang.
And he was 5'6", 160. This is weight.
So small.
Super small. Well, he was in the cavalry division, and
Of which army?
The Russian army.
The Russian army. Okay.
and
They
he was
still had cavalry in World War II.
yeah. And he was, I'm pretty sure it was one or two. It was in that era.
Yeah.
And he was fighting, and his short horse got shot out from under him.
Mhm.
And so he waited with his horse, and then when the battle ended, he picked his horse up and carried it back.
What?
There's pictures of
Ridiculous.
him. Yeah.
Like fully off the ground, not just dragging it?
Yeah. He was walking back over all the, debris of war
Mm-hmm.
and brought his horse back because he loved his horse so much.
Wow.
And then he gets captured in another battle later, and they have him. But he's such a good prisoner, they can't really give him any trouble, so they just put him in solitary confinement.
Yeah.
And then he finds out that they decide they're going to execute him.
Mm-hmm.
Well, he breaks the chains and bends the bars and escapes.
Oh my gosh.
He was doing calisthenics with, I think, barely one meal a day, but
Mhm.
had enough that he could break the chains.
Mm.
And
Amazing.
then
Mhm.
he goes on to becoming a circus professional.
Mhm.
And he did feats where he would hang a piano from a rope with his teeth. Or he would pick up a piano with 3 people on it.
That doesn't even make sense.
It's crazy. And then there's a video of him like doing one
Whoa.
of his iron demonstrations. He has like 1/2 inch iron, like
Mhm.
a 4-foot bar.
Yeah.
And he starts just bending it on all parts of his body,
Yeah.
and he makes like an A out of it.
Wow.
He sets it down, and then he does some other things, and he doesn't look jacked.
No.
He just looks like a normal dude. He said that his secret was training isometrics, all tendon strength. So like
Yeah.
things where you can't actually move it, but you give all the force you can give to it.
Mm-hmm.
And he said that's what gives you real strength.
That makes sense.
I was like, man, what a guy! Like, just pick up your horse and walk it back. Like,
Yeah.
what?
Oh, it's truly incredible. That makes sense though, because your muscles get strong faster than your tendons. So more often than not, your tendons are really like the limiting factor.
Yeah, don't tendons grow like 3 times as slow or something like that?
Something like that. It's half to 3. I don't know.
Hmm.
Somewhere in there. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. But all that is to say, back to your point, Jonathan, the genetics haven't changed that much in the last 1,000 years.
Sure.
It mostly is mindset,
Hmm.
which is both amazing and like kind of gives me hope for some of those things. But it also is really sad because at least in our country, most of us spend more and more time on our butts.
Yes.
When you're like, our genetics are still driving us to get out and to move.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. We have perhaps the most sedentary culture to have ever existed,
Perhaps. Yeah.
at least across the
board.
across the
Yeah.
levels of population,
Yeah.
every tier of the population.
Yeah. Yeah. Fun fact to kind of give a little bit of credence to that. My wife was reading a book called The Moral Case for Fossil Fuel. Quite interesting book.
Yeah.
Not what I was expecting at all from her description of it. But she was talking about, or she was telling me about a certain section that really stood out to her. And she mentioned like this guy, the author did the calculation and essentially realized that modern American, and this book is like maybe 15, 20 years old. So I don't know if the numbers have changed somewhat, but you'll get the point. Modern Americans use energy. And if there's a conversion you can do to like X amount of energy equals X amount of work. And so that the rate at which we consume energy is equivalent to having roughly 55 slaves, which would make the modern Americans like consumption of goods and products equivalent to like incredibly rich people
From 300 years ago or
yeah,
whenever.
or 1,000 years ago. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. I don't know. Whenever I think slaves, I think of Roman times for some reason. But yeah.
Okay, so we're gonna have to look into this.
Yeah.
There's a ratio by which you can convert man hours,
Yeah. Energy to man hours.
energy to man hours, and
Something like
given
that.
the level of energy we consume
Mhm.
through the cars we drive,
Yeah.
the electricity we use, the calories we consume,
Mhm.
it's
Yeah.
as if we have
55
this many
slaves.
people working for us.
Mhm. Yeah.
Interesting.
And think about it, like keeping your fridge running,
Mm-hmm.
preserving that much food.
Yeah.
Where does that food come from? Right? How much time was spent in preparing that food? That like takes you maybe only 5 minutes to prepare and eat right now, but all the prep that went into getting it to that point,
Yep.
like that's part of the calculation. Like understanding like where does this all come from?
Right.
Like, those apples over there were picked by someone and shipped.
Yep.
And like
Right.
yeah.
I didn't have to go pick those apples, so
Yeah.
therefore I'm really benefiting from
Mm-hmm.
the labor of someone else.
Mm-hmm.
Does the money I've paid for those apples really compensate those other people to the extent that they should be compensated? Are my apples basically
Slave apples.
produced by slave labor?
Maybe not those apples, but some apples, sure.
Yeah. How about them apples? So,
Yeah, yeah. But just to kind of put that into perspective of your point about the most sedentary across the board, I think that is probably true. Of that we in America have access to that. Where essentially, and I could be totally misremembering. It might be 9 slaves as opposed to 55. I don't remember. It's been years.
we got to get the number. We got to find out.
But either way, it's a surprisingly large amount. And you're thinking like, all right, who could afford to have even 9 slaves? Wealthy people, maybe farmers, but mostly wealthy people, which makes us the most affluent society in a long, long time across the board.
But it makes you wonder if we have simply outsourced our slave labor to places we can no longer see.
Oh, definitely.
Right.
Definitely.
So I might be very proud of myself that I don't participate in owning slaves, but the clothes I wear, the phone I use, were those essentially produced by slaves.
Well, if it's Apple, absolutely. And not to say,
I mean, I buy all my phones secondhand, so like
to say that,
maybe is my participation a little removed or reduced. I guess I could argue that,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
I still paid money for it,
Yeah.
and we still know where it came from.
Yep. Yep. Yeah. And not to say that Samsung is any better, or whatever else we're using, but I think we would all be surprised to know how much we benefit from what is essentially slave labor. Of like we pay cheap prices for things because we've shipped a lot of our labor and manufacturing overseas. What we've done is we've traded convenience and price for, in many cases, morality. And what we've done is we've just removed it far enough that it doesn't bother us.
Right.
Which is kind of crazy because at the same time we live in an age of connectivity.
Sure.
We could know all these things, we could figure it out, but mostly we choose not to.
Right.
You know.
Yes. It's tough. What's the alternative? Right.
Good question. Good question.
So I buy my used phone, so I feel a little less guilty because I'm not participating in the
Totally.
sort of technological euphoria that surrounds many new products.
Mm-hmm.
So I feel pretty good about that.
Mm-hmm.
On the other hand, that's about as far as I can go.
Mm-hmm.
My job requires the technology that's on my phone.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Right. I couldn't do my job with a dumb phone.
Mm-hmm.
Not anymore. The industry's changed too much,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Once upon a time,
I
real
totally
estate.
agree. I totally agree.
Once upon a time, real estate was obviously not done with smartphones, but
Mhm.
at this point, it's just not the way it
Yeah.
is.
Yeah. And I don't claim to have the answers to that. Because it is very complicated. And recognizing, yeah, I can't, it's not as simple as saying like, okay, I won't do that. At least for most of us, it's not.
Hmm.
You could be radically mendicant in that and be like, great, that means no more phone. That means,
And we have friends who have done that, right? That's one of the great things about living in Lander is you
Mhm.
do meet these people who have made that life decision.
I don't know if I know anyone who doesn't have a phone.
Travis doesn't.
Yes, but Margie does. So their family still has a phone.
Their family does still. I mean,
Yeah.
by normal American standards, that's pretty radical.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And I'm not saying it's not. But still, like they're making that concession to like, no, we recognize we still need this as a family.
Mm-hmm.
And if I want to call Travis, I call Margie's phone.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Like, yeah, he does not personally carry one around all the time. No.
Travis only has 4 slaves.
They split 4.5 each.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, no, and I'm not saying, I'm not even advocating like we should get rid of all phones. I think there are things that we can do and move towards doing, and I think we can slowly shift the culture into being more that way.
Right.
Of saying either, yeah, we like phones are going to be a hard one to change, but of saying like, all right, let's bring manufacturing back to the United States,
Mm-hmm.
where people get a decent wage, and the phones are going to be more expensive, but hopefully, like that'll get rid of that slavery issue, and that won't necessarily change the cost and energy, but it will it would change the cost and energy, make it more expensive. But
It'll cost
but the
you
compensation
more
will be
your
fair.
energy.
Yes.
Right. If your phone
Definitely.
costs $3,000 instead of
$200.
$1,000
Yeah.
new or $400 used,
Yeah.
if all of a sudden,
Is that what phones are going for nowadays? Good Lord.
like a new phone, like a new iPhone,
Yeah.
new iPhone will be $1,000, maybe 1,200.
Goodness.
Hold on. I mean, let's use my
Use this
phone
phone to find that out.
to look that up right now.
Yeah.
What do we got? We
But
got
there are so many things that we can do, right?
Yeah.
Simply buying less items, of like recognizing I don't need all this junk. We're convinced by modern advertising that we do. And we really like, I would be willing to bet that your average American could get rid of 70% of the items they own and live a totally happy, maybe even more happy life.
I didn't even know they're gone.
iPhone
Not even for
16,
a lot of it. Yeah.
iPhone 16
They're
Pro
16.
Max, 1 terabyte black titanium phone, unlocked,
Who the heck needs a terabyte?
$1,600.
Oh. They
So
just
that
add another
so that's
$100
the
every time they come up with a new.
so that's a top end.
Yeah, yeah.
That's their top end brand new deal.
Good
So
Lord.
$1,600 or $50 a month for the next 2 years.
That's like a
If you want to make it
It
if
is
you want
like
to
a
make
credit
it
now.
well, if you want to make it less painful, right?
But something interesting, I was rereading Democracy in America by
Yeah,
Tocqueville
Tocqueville.
By Tocqueville.
and he was talking about the difference between the North and the South.
Mm.
And he was making a case that slavery actually was the worst option
The worst.
in economic terms. Because he said that the reason why the South was doing so poorly economically is
Mhm.
because they had slaves.
Mm.
Because he said that when you have to work for a for-profit system, you have to make sure your labor is worthwhile.
Mm-hmm.
So you make the best decisions possible for the best outcome.
Mm-hmm.
When you're a slave, you don't think as an individual with necessarily like responsibility in the game because if you give good work or bad work, it's really just depend on what the master wants.
Mm-hmm.
Rather, if you're actually earning your living by what you do,
Mm-hmm.
you have to make sure it's profitable.
Mm-hmm.
So meaning what you trade in will be traded back with something more than what you
Mhm.
gave. So at that
As in someone you need to ensure that what you have to offer is
Adds value.
marketable.
Yeah.
right. Yeah.
Someone wants what you have.
And is
Yeah.
willing to pay you for it. Yeah.
Hmm.
And so he
Yeah.
said that's why the North went leagues and bounds way bigger and way faster than the South.
Mm-hmm. Well, they also had all the centers for manufacturing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, he said the South could have had it if they just thought in a different paradigm.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Because he said they just thought, oh, we get wealthy by slaves.
Mm-hmm.
The North said we get wealthy by working.
Yeah.
And so, because he said the South,
Mm-hmm.
the slave owners or the plantation owners, they didn't really understand farming very well. Because
Fair.
he said they weren't
No, they
ever
really
in the
didn't.
field. They would oversee it, but they didn't understand the mechanics, as in like an actual individual farmer understands his crop
Mhm.
so well. Because
Yeah.
he's the one, if it doesn't
He's gonna
make
get it
it,
to work. Yeah.
his family's not going to eat. He
Yeah.
has to make sure it's going to work well. There's a lot
Mhm.
more on the line.
Yeah.
And it's so fascinating listening to him because essentially,
I feel like plantation owners would still have that necessity, being like they're not necessarily the ones doing it, but they still gotta like feed their families. They still gotta feed their slaves,
right, yeah,
unless they want to keep purchasing them, which is not profitable.
yeah.
Yeah.
So maybe,
I don't
yeah,
know.
it's like a tighter frame of
I don't know.
control.
I don't know.
I don't know, yeah. It was interesting though, because I was in Atlanta last year.
Yeah.
I went to a few of the spots where they had like the Civil War,
Mm-hmm.
and they just did a comparison of like what the North had versus the South.
Mhm.
And we had about 1,000 times the ability to make stuff than the South did.
Sounds about right.
And it's like,
In terms of manufacturing power.
Yeah.
and it's like the South could have had it all. They weren't that far away.
Yeah.
But they decided not to because they preferred slaves.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And essentially, Tocqueville was saying that slaves will make you poorer than if you actually have free market.
If you own the slaves, but I think part of it was also that the North was profiting from it.
Mm.
The North was profiting from the South owning slaves.
Oh, interesting.
That's my theory. I don't really
Mm.
I don't have any concrete numbers to support that, but it seems to make sense, right? Because the South was producing tons and tons of cotton, and tobacco and a lot of other things, but that's like the raw material. They would ship a lot of it to England or New England, many places in the North. They would manufacture things and then sell it for even more.
Mm.
So I really do think that what you're saying is true. The North was definitely like leaps and bounds ahead in terms of manufacturing, but I do think that they were also profiting from the slave labor.
They certainly were not two isolated systems,
Yeah, no, they were not. They were not.
but
Yeah.
this would be very interesting to look into
Mhm.
de Tocqueville and the economics of slavery.
Mhm.
It sounds like a controversial topic to get into
It does. It does. Yeah.
because I guess inside the system you think, wait a minute, how could we possibly turn a profit if we have to start paying all these people, right? So inside from the inside, it looks impossible, but our country has produced far more economic wealth since the Civil War than it ever did before. And part of that is the growth of the population and so forth. But right, we have more wealth post-slavery. So you'd have to argue.
Well, I mean, just look at us versus China. China's technically a slave country, and they have 4 or 5 times the population than we do, and we still do twice or 3 times the economic volume or something like that. That's
Do
crazy.
we?
I don't know if
Thought they passed us.
I don't know if I don't know why the GDPs stack up against each
We
other.
definitely owe them a ton of money.
A lot of money, yeah.
What were we thinking?
Yeah.
What were we thinking?
Politicians, man. Yeah, I don't know.
Hmm.
I had a thought, but I lost it.
This would be a great topic for a master's thesis.
Yeah.
I gotta go back to school.
Be pretty applicable right now. People like it would be very controversial, but it's something that I think would really help people understand.
Well, I mean, I quote this guy a lot. His name's Michael Saylor.
Mhm.
He's a conservative software billionaire.
Okay.
He said if America was free, he said we're about 30% free right now.
30% free.
You add up all the regulations, taxes, all the things we have to face.
Mhm.
He said we would be a 30 trillion a year GDP if we were free. So he said they steal $27 trillion away from the American people every year.
That's about what we're in debt.
And I was like,
A little bit less, yeah.
yeah, it's insane. He said that's how much they take from us. He's like, just put that in perspective. And he said, and the crazy thing is,
Yeah.
we are the most free people
In the world.
in the world.
In some ways, yeah.
That's crazy.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's wild. But yeah, I think they essentially, since World War II, they monetized the work power of America
Mhm.
for their own gains.
Mhm.
So essentially, the government was
We're
like,
talking about politicians and government now.
Mhm.
Yeah.
yeah, they just like siphon it all off and then
Yeah.
just give it to the world, make the world run on everything we invent
Mhm.
and make. And then we somehow have to pay debts to all these people for the stuff we made the first time. And then they steal all of our inventions and technology. And then somehow,
You're making it sound like we're the only ones who are inventing things.
pretty much.
Really?
I mean, well, think light bulbs, trains, planes, most kitchen appliances, cars, assembly line manufacturing. Shh. We were the best in shipping.
Vaccines? Were vaccines invented in the U.S.?
I don't know.
Louis Pasteur?
I
No,
sure
he
was.
invented pasteurization.
Yeah.
That's not the same thing.
No.
Fiber optic
Inoculation.
cables, Kevlar, Wi-Fi, internet.
Fair enough. I'd have a hard time
waterproof.
thinking of something that came
Ice
from that.
cream, waffles.
No way we invented waffles.
We invented waffles.
What?
Mhm.
Not the Belgians?
We used to invent a waffle cone.
Yes, waffle
The
cone.
waffle cone.
So yeah,
Yeah.
thanks. Fact check.
Fact check. Waffle cone.
Yeah,
Hmm.
pretty much everything.
Wow. I mean, I'm sure there's a ton. Yeah.
I
There's got to be things that are coming. Yeah.
I looked.
Coming from other places, but not as much.
I looked up like all the things that America invented,
Mhm.
like main household items,
Mhm.
and we're like 20-1
Wow.
to the rest of the world. It's
Hmm.
crazy.
Wow. Wow.
Okay, so it might be a classic
Yeah.
80-20 split.
Yeah. Well, we do.
Hmm.
Yeah, we do ship a lot of our move a lot of our manufacturing overseas.
Yeah.
That I agree with. In the name of making it cheaper.
Cheaper.
Yeah. Cheaper just means we're paying the cost somewhere else.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And maybe like sometimes that's the environment. Like it doesn't make sense to me that we buy things from China of like that takes so much energy to ship things over there because they have to ship in the materials a lot of the time, manufacture it and then ship it to where it's being sold. That takes so much time and energy. And we talk about cow farts being like the biggest threat to the environment.
No.
Like, what about the billions and billions of gallons and pounds of fuel burned moving things around? that don't need to be.
I talked to a guy who had a acquaintance who they invented a specialized shampoo slash hair dryer that was used for dog grooming,
Okay.
right? So it was imagine the vacuum slash sudsing
Like a doctor
vacuum.
carpet for dogs.
Yeah, basically, right? What you use to shampoo your what you use to shampoo your rugs, basically
Yeah.
the same thing for dog fur. Anyway, so they shopped it around the US and they could get a better price having materials shipped to China, assembled in China, and shipped back than they could having it assembled in the US.
Why?
I
Just slave labor?
Is it just the labor?
Do they skimp on materials? Oh,
I don't know if there's labor, there might be labor associated costs such as oversight, what the company is charging you because they have OSHA inspections and they have health and they have salary
yeah.
and benefit matching, right? So it's not
Yep.
just the
Yep.
hourly wage of the workers, it's all the other
No.
things you have to have in
Yep.
place
Yep.
if you want to have a manufacturing installation.
Yep.
Um,
Yep. And that's how you get essentially slave labor, is you remove a lot of those things.
and maybe if you want to manufacture things, the materials have to go through more inspections. There's more limitations on
Yeah.
when the manufacturing can take place and
Mhm.
what. Right. So it's not, again, it's not
Yeah.
just the
It's not
hourly
just the
wage
wage,
of the
yeah.
guy sitting at
Yeah.
a workstation.
But
It's everything else that goes into it.
and a certain amount of that needs to go into it.
Mm.
Like you need to have a certain level of quality. And I definitely don't put it past people cutting corners on that. But I think a
Right.
certain amount of that in America is also bureaucracy and corruption
Right.
of being like, all right, if you're going to make money on this, I'm going to too, by taxing you or charging you to inspect it or
Mm.
whatever else.
Right. There needs to be some authority that has some oversight to avoid
Absolutely.
abuse
Absolutely.
of the worker, right? I mean,
Mhm.
encyclicals have been written in an effort to make
Absolutely.
sure that people are treated humanely. So there does need to be an authority, and
Mhm.
that authority needs to be, if you're going to have a governorship, there needs to be some support of that governorship,
Mhm.
and that does mean taxes.
Yes. Yes, it does. It does. It's the same.
But at what level is it prudent, and at what level is it excessive?
I think a lot of it has to do with size, and I don't know what that size is.
Hmm.
But I was talking with someone yesterday about something very similar, at least in my mind, which is unions and how, like, when you work for a large corporation, there almost has to be a union so that you can stand up to the power of that
Sure.
and like and get benefits. It's a great thing to have,
Mhm.
right? To work for a low rate wage and have no benefits, like large employers can absolutely take advantage of their employees. So unions make sense. On the other hand, my experience of unions has mostly been from the outside. And all of the jobs that and I haven't worked that many, but all of the jobs that I've worked in where I've been a part of a company that doesn't have a union, and then I meet people who are in the same industry in unions,
Mhm.
they are incredibly inefficient.
The companies themselves or the people?
People,
The people,
people
the
on
union
the
workers.
union workers are incredibly inefficient. Of like, I worked on a landscaping crew for a while, and you wouldn't think like, what kind of landscaping crew has a union? They don't.
Yeah.
They don't. But the instance I'm thinking of that stands out clearly in my mind was we went to go do a job on a local college campus, right? And so there were groundskeepers. They were part of like the maintenance crew, and because it was a large Israeli community college, so it wasn't huge, but
But they were unionized.
they were unionized, right? And so it was cheaper. I don't know if it was cheaper, but like this college would hire the company that I worked for to come in and do jobs when they needed things to actually get done.
Oh dear.
Because we would come in, we would do work, and we would see people like riding around in golf carts all day, doing nothing.
Mm.
We're like, who are those guys? We're like, oh, those are the groundskeepers. And you're like, well, what am I doing here? And
Right.
you're like, oh, they're in the union. Like, does that just mean they don't work? Basically.
Hmm.
And not all unions are like that. Not all jobs are like that. Not all people are like that. But like, there's the union power needs to be balanced with the company's power. And right now, like there's not a balance of that, right? The oversight needs to balance and restrain the institutions as well. And that kind of goes both ways, right? When unions become corrupt, employees do nothing, and you can't fire them because they're part of the union,
Right.
right? When governments become corrupt, they bring in tariffs and taxes and inspections that are pointless and just to make them money. So absolutely, there needs to be a balance. I don't know what that balance is.
Mhm.
I'm not in that world anymore.
This is where I intone the pain of prudence.
The pain, absolutely, absolutely.
Right.
And so,
You
like,
can't
yeah,
run to one side or the other saying
No.
safety lies in the hands of a representative body for the worker.
no,
No, there have been corrupt unions, and
absolutely.
on the other hand, you can't just say, well, we need unfettered pursuit of profit, and that will protect the interests of the people. That's
Of
led
the
to all
company.
of the company.
But
That's
then, yeah, but then the workers get taken advantage of.
right.
Yeah.
We've had child labor. We've had
Hmm.
companies in which managers were routinely slowing the clocks, right? So they could get 14 hours out of you instead of 12 and a half. But you were still supposed you still thought you were working a 12 and a half hour day, right? Like it was still
That's
a wildly
crazy.
long shift.
Yeah. Well, yeah, no, I think you hit it on the nail. It's a question of virtue, not a question of law or regulation. No, like
Not
we're
virtue,
not
but
going to fix it by putting in more laws and regulations.
well,
We're going to fix it by having a culture that's virtuous.
I agree with that. I think one thing we were talking about with my brother Kevin was
Mhm.
that just last week? Was that the 2 weeks ago?
ago?
3.
Oh
Whoa,
gosh.
time flies. We were talking with him about the there's a certain mindset in America that says if you want to fix problems, we need an agency that is removed from human choice
Hmm.
in order to oversee these needs.
Hmm.
So we need to create an agency that will have protocols that will simply tell people what to do. And so the less we have people thinking and making choices, the more likely we are that the system will run as it ought to.
Hmm.
And so that is the mindset of a certain type of person here in the US. I suppose they're elsewhere in the world as well.
Yeah.
But my point to you, Carl, is that you can't just say, oh, we need prudence and virtue. Some people say, no, prudence and virtue involves human judgment and human choices. And that's the last thing I want operating in a system.
Hmm.
I want to take human choice and human judgment out of the system.
You want to cease living?
Well, it's just an attitude we'll have to
Yeah.
contend with if you
Yeah.
want to affect the changes.
Totally. Totally.
You'll just have to have an answer for the people who say, humans are corrupt. We can't rely on virtue. We need systems that are thought through. Those will be more proof against the corruption. We have to have a way to answer that person.
Hmm. And has it worked? We've tried that.
Every socialist country is that.
Yeah. And you see, the more socialist they become, the worse it works.
I think honestly that might be
But-
their fault, thinking you can't have human judgment.
Yeah, you have to. You have to.
Because-
Again, we're coming back to like you're thinking too little of people. It's harder, for sure, and people are definitely broken, and not everyone's going to go with it. And it's way harder. That the system, thinking that a system is the answer, is the unimaginative way out.
That bureaucracy is the answer,
Hmm.
right? If we can add another layer of bureaucracy for each problem that we encounter, then all will be well.
Hmm.
All shall be well when we have instituted a bureaucracy. I'm I'm instinctively resistant to what I just said, what I
Yeah.
just articulated,
Yeah.
but I want to be careful and make sure that we understand where that instinct comes from. That instinct probably does come from seeing genuine human corruption.
Yeah.
People in positions of power, in the sense that what's power? They have the ability to sway things one way or another, which means they get to make a choice about it. And so you see when people make those wrong choices. So you say,
Yeah.
well, maybe if we took the choice away, they wouldn't make the bad choice. And there's a certain logic to that.
There is a certain logic to that, but it also, it again is thinking too little of the human person, right? Of like, what is man without his free will? If you remove all the choices from men, you're not creating good men, you're creating slaves. Yeah. I mean, it also like the more bureaucracy you create and the more removed you make power, the more corrupt it becomes. Right? The bigger any institution is, the more corrupt it is.
Say more.
So, the my understanding of Catholic social teaching is that it mostly, not entirely, but mostly boils down to the principle of subsidiarity. Right? The idea that if there's an issue, it should be handled by the most proximate authority able to deal with it. Right? If there's an issue in my home with my kids, it is best for me to deal with it until I cannot. I don't go to the police when my kids don't behave. I don't go to the mayor when my daughter won't put her toys away. Right? That's ridiculous. And that's what we're trying to do by creating more bureaucracy. We're trying to say, like, all right, we can't decide this here in Lander. Let's kick it up to the state. Or let's lobby the federal government to change this thing. Right? And
Right. Or Lander should not be in charge of the roads in Wyoming.
All the roads. No.
Right.
No.
We're too far removed.
Absolutely. And so, like, who do you deal with that, right? I mean, that's why the Electoral College exists, is to try to bring some of that balance to two places, right? That's why it's not just a popular vote. It's trying to bring the balance of, like, okay, this part of the country, their opinion matters just as much as this part of the country. Even though there's more people over here, these people over here should not have a disproportional weight of influence over this portion of the country. Yeah, and I mean, you could look at so many different things, right? The number of homeless people, and really, I have a lot of thoughts on homeless people, like the homeless problem in America and other places around the world as well. I was listening to someone or reading an article saying, like, we really shouldn't call most of them homeless. We should call most of them jobless, or not working, simply not working. Anyway, like, there are genuinely people who are homeless, living on the street, destitute. I think the systems that we have created have exacerbated the problem rather than fixing it. And you can see that in the number, like the increase in the homeless populations around America, right? You go anywhere. For us, kind of the closest major population center is Denver. My wife used to work in Christ in the City, which is are you guys familiar with it at all? Yeah, so they go administer to the homeless, not by like providing food and money and shelter, although they do try to help people. Like get meals. I think they provide meals like once a week maybe, and they do try to like help people find housing, but they don't like provide money for it or anything like that. What they do is they go out and they try to just befriend these people who are destitute, who are living on the street. Or maybe some of them are even like part-time on the street. It's weird. But what they do
As in part of the year or part of the week?
Part of the week sometimes.
Interesting.
So I'll get to that in a second.
Okay.
Yeah. So they go out and they befriend these people and they treat them like human beings, right? They have face-to-face conversations. They get to know them. They show them that they care about them, right? They instill in them a sense of worth just by being their friends, right? For so many people who are homeless, many of them don't talk to other people. Some, like many of them have like communities of other people who are homeless, but many of them like are never looked in the eye by someone who's not homeless. Everyone avoids eye contact. Don't look with them. And so they begin to see themselves as worthless, except for the other people, like they hang out with them who are also worthless. And they all have that sort of idea, right? Um, Her experience of, I think she was a missionary in Denver in 2014. 10 years later, 2020, she says she is terrified to go to downtown Denver now. 10 years ago, and part of it is we have a family, part of it like we have a little bit more to lose. But the kinds of people, the number of people, the kinds of things that they're doing has just escalated incredibly in the last 10 years. Meaning like before
There's more people
there's
doing
more people.
worse things.
Yes. Yes.
In parts of the city that used to be pretty reputable.
Yeah. Yeah. Even parts of the city where like there were homeless before.
Uh-huh.
Like it's scary. It's scary. A friend of ours, Sarah Cooper, had her car stolen from the parking lot of the Ronald McDonald House.
Mm-hmm.
Right? This woman is in Denver to receive medical care, and someone stole her car from the hospital parking lot, essentially.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Whoa.
That's despicable.
Yeah.
It was so stressful it sent her into labor.
Oh.
Right?
Is she overdue? They were doing her a favor, right?
Maybe.
The hospital has a couple people be like, "Hey, go take the car. That'll get her where she right."
Right. So that brings me to the other point about kind of the homeless situation, which I read a short article by this guy who I believe is from Brazil, and he has been working in like ministry, particularly for the homeless, for like 15 years. And he said for the first 4 or 5 years felt really great to like go out and give people food and like talk to them and get to know them and like help them find shelter. But after 4 years, he's like, we're not making a difference. Why is it getting worse? Like it feels good to go out and help these people, but why is it getting worse? And so what he did was he took a year and he lived part-time on the street. Like 3 or 4 nights out of the week, he would go and live on the street with these homeless people and just get to know them, get to know their lives. And they accepted him because he was there so much. And he was like, most of these people don't need to be here. For most of these people, it is easier to live on the street than it is to live in than to live in with a low paying job. Like you get more money living on the street than you do earning minimum wage in a lot of these places.
Wow.
And so we're disincentivizing people to work by doing that. And what that does is it essentially destroys their self-worth. And they think like, all right, I'm not going to have a sense of pride because without a sense of pride and like any desire to achieve, I can live better. I can be more comfortable living on the street. And granted, that's more true in places like Brazil where it's not as cold as, Colorado or Wyoming. Like there's definitely a little more incentive to get out of the elements. But I think that's very true, generally speaking, in terms of the homeless population. Yeah. So I forget where I was going before that, before I kind of got on the tangent. What were we talking about?
We were talking about the element of choice in problems, but also the elements of subsidiarity.
Yes, thank you.
In being able to deal with the problems
you.
that you find at the local level.
Yes, thank you. So coming back to that, that is an excellent example of how bureaucracy makes those people's lives worse by like essentially putting them on the streets, right? So
bureaucracy being
the removal of responsibility of like displacing it over here instead of saying like, no, these people in my community are homeless. It should be my responsibility and the responsibility of our community to take care of them. We should not be relying on money from the state or from the federal government.
Interesting.
Right. So what that does is essentially it relying on the state or federal government or even big charities, right? Of saying like, every Christmas I get a letter from Food for the Poor and I send them a check and I feel good about myself because I'm doing something to help the homeless. And you're like, yes and no. Yes, you're giving money to Food for the Poor and you're feeding people. Awesome. You're also enabling them to live on the street instead of, and I'm not saying that we need to totally stop and not care of these people, because there are people who genuinely can't work for
Sure.
one reason or another, disability of one kind or another. But essentially what we're doing is we're we're doing an action that allows us to feel good about ourselves, and we're not helping those people get off the street. We're Yeah, we're removing ourselves, and we're sending money to people who live far away, generally speaking, because the money that I give to Food for the Poor probably doesn't end up feeding anyone here in Lander.
Oh, it definitely doesn't help.
Yeah,
Lander.
like maybe if you live in a big city like New York, it will feed someone in New York.
That might be true.
But the point still remains, like, you're not feeding them. You're paying someone else to feed them, right? And so you're saying, like, all right, you go handle this. And you're removing the responsibility of saying, like, no, this is my community. These are my people. And you feel good about yourself.
But it's analogous
You
to
don't change
like
anything.
always mopping the floor because the children are walking through with muddy shoes. The real problem is the children aren't being taught to take their shoes off.
Yes. Yeah.
Like,
That's
hey,
it. Yeah.
hey, give me money so I can afford more mop heads and more suds and more buckets. Well, okay, this will lead to cleaner floors. But you know what would really help the problem is if we
Taught them to not walk in the
stop
house with muddy shoes.
Yeah, if we
Yeah.
right,
Or teach them to clean up after themselves.
right,
Both, preferably.
yeah,
Yeah. But it's harder.
or gave them somewhere else to play
But
besides.
it's a heck of a lot harder. My wife and I are learning this right now with our toddlers, where we're
Uh-huh.
like, our 3-year-old, she's almost 4, can dress herself.
Mm-hmm.
Half of the time she does. Half of the time we're just like, we need to go. You need to get dressed. I'm gonna put your pants on for you. Because
She might decide she's not in the mood.
70% of the time would rather run around in just her underwear. Right. And so,
Well, and which of us wouldn't?
absolutely. But at the same time, like, we need to go to the park. You can't run around in your underwear.
Right.
And even explaining that to her, it takes way more patience and way more work on our part to make her dress herself than it does for us to just dress her.
Right.
In the long run, she needs to learn how to dress herself, and she knows how,
Right.
but she needs to build the habit of actually doing it.
Yeah.
And so it takes more work on our part. And it kind of goes back to what we were talking about earlier of, like, when we cut cost, when we move things away to make it cheaper, we're paying somewhere else. And so, like, that's essentially the principle of subsidiarity, is if we don't take care of it here and we move the responsibility somewhere else, we're paying for that somewhere else. And the payment in terms of the homeless population is our homeless population is growing.
You can't ever truly export costs.
You cannot eliminate costs.
Hmm.
You just move where you're paying it.
Right. Right. Yeah. Are we paying more taxes because those taxes are needed for Medicaid and Medicare and welfare programs that would not have nearly as many people on their rolls if
we ate healthier food and exercise regularly?
if we ate healthier food and exercise, but also if the bottom quarter of the working class
didn't get free healthcare?
made significantly more money.
Mm-hmm. Oh,
right? If they made significantly more money,
would they have the same issues? Yeah.
Fewer people on food stamps, fewer people on other types of welfare,
Yeah.
fewer people on Medicaid, which is the one that
Medicare, Medicaid.
Yeah, which is the one for older people, which is the one that's used for people who can't afford other health insurance.
I have no idea.
I think it's Medicare is for people who are retired. Anyhow.
Yeah.
But yeah, and would those people actually be producing in a way that would not only pay their own way, but would they actually be super productive?
Yeah.
And overall, the country would be wealthier in a way that we can't even imagine. Just like a slave owner 150 years ago can't imagine how starting to pay his slaves would actually lead to
more money,
overall greater abundance, of which he would also be a beneficiary.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
I think so.
Yeah.
I mean, the healthcare industry is such a good example of that. I don't have any stats or numbers to back it up, but I heard probably 4 or 5 years ago now that Well, partly, and this was because I was getting into paying for my own health insurance and yeah, and all that kind of stuff. But I have heard that doctors' bills have increased exponentially in proportion to how many people have insurance, right? So the theory being, and I'm sure someone's crunched the numbers on this, I haven't, being that doctors charge what they charge because they know insurance companies can cover it,
Sure.
right? So that what we're actually paying for is not work like we're not really paying for it. Insurance companies are paying for it, but they charge us ridiculous sums of money of like $500 for a 15-minute doctor's exam. You're like, wait, what? When you think about that, like what is all that money going towards? There's no way that 15 minutes is worth that amount of money, right? Most of it, like I don't even know where it goes. I don't even know where it goes.
There's a lot of people who get a slice of that pie for sure.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
But I think it is true
Yeah.
to summarize
But we're tricked into thinking it's worth it because of that $500, our deductible is only like 100,
$80.
80 bucks, whatever, right? So we think like, oh, this is worth it. But then if you sit down and look at how much you're paying over the course of the year to your insurance plus your deductible, you're like, unless you're sick a lot, you would have way more money in your bank account if you just saved that money. And granted, most people won't save that money. Sure, that's their choice. But like, oh my gosh, there is so much money down the drain. And if you pay cash for most of your doctor's visits, like instead of using your insurance, you'll pay less.
Even you as a family over the course of
Most likely.
is that
Unless-
also, are you
unless
also
we have-
calling that office and then saying, hey, you charged me $40 for an ibuprofen. You charged me $160 per stitch. Let's talk about, are you talking about if one does that?
I don't know. I don't know what would happen if you did that. I've never done that, but I do know from personal experience that if you say like, no, I'm not using insurance, I'm paying cash. They'll be like, oh, here's your bill.
Here's your bill. Let's adjust it. I presume they can lower it because they can take most of that straight into their own pocket.
I would imagine so.
Yeah, the clinic, I mean.
Yeah.
Pay the doctor, pay their overhead. But if it's insurance, there's a lot of people who have access to that pie.
Yeah.
The insurance provider, the
Yeah.
PPO administration, the HMO representative,
So there again, right? The whole concept of insurance is removing responsibility from ourselves and saying like it totally makes sense if you're like just starting out and you don't have a whole lot of money, you get insurance, and if an accident happens right away, you don't have any to pay it off. You're like, great, insurance makes sense in that case. If you're established and you have savings, it doesn't make sense to have insurance.
Yeah.
Unless you're doing massive, massive projects that you can't afford.
well, that's
Doesn't make sense.
that's the risk. As soon as you need
Absolutely. It is a risk.
as soon as you need a lung put back together,
Yeah,
that's going to wipe out your savings right quick.
absolutely.
Unless the system was so totally reformed, right, that instead of a procedure costing $80,000, it only cost
20.
maybe 12.
Yeah.
Right. And if you couldn't
But I
cover it
imagine-
out of your own savings, maybe
Yeah.
friends and neighbors pitched in.
But I imagine something like putting your lung back together is more on the lines of millions than thousands in terms of in terms of the money that changes hands. Not what you actually pay as an insured person, but in terms of like what goes through all the doctor's offices. And again, I don't really know. I don't have the stats on that. I'm ballpark guessing and imagining. Like lung sounds like a big deal, but like chronic life-threatening illness, right? That would be incredibly expensive over the course of your life. Makes sense. Insurance makes sense in that case. But if you have a chronic illness, most companies aren't going to cover you,
Insure you.
or they'll charge you
Crazy.
an arm and a leg.
Yeah.
So are you really saving money? And I really don't know. I would be very curious for someone to sit down and crunch the numbers and be like, what if we got rid of all insurance and all the things that went with that? What does it actually cost to like pay doctors and nurses and everyone a decent wage What does it actually cost to do this procedure?
That'd be really interesting because Henry Ford actually, when he was doing things, he bought a hospital
Yeah.
and he was very disenfranchised by how much everything cost back in the day.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, I don't think people really know how to run things very well. So he
Yeah.
bought this to just test it out. And he got private doctors, private nurses, and he's built it so he said if you're in there for a day, that costs you a days of labor,
Mm-hmm.
and a procedure was a week worth of labor. And that was pretty much it. Like
Yeah.
everything could be covered in that amount of money, and
Wow.
everything worked. And so he was
Mm.
talking about how there's so many inefficiencies. That's where all the cost really comes from.
Hmm.
And that's why Henry Ford was considered a genius, is because he said the two things to make your business more profitable
Mm-hmm.
is one, first thing is to pay your employees more money.
Yeah.
Number two is figure out inefficiencies in your systems.
Mm-hmm.
And so he would each year drop the price of his car
Wow.
and then ask all of his managers to figure out how to keep the profit margin the same by making our systems work better.
Wow.
Mm.
So
He would say our car is going to cost this.
yep,
Go figure out how to protect our
Our
margin.
profit. Yeah.
yeah, he would drop it every year so more and more people could buy cars
Wow.
because his goal was to make cars and
Ubiquitous.
Ubiquitous.
Yeah.
yeah, because he said it was a luxury item, but he said it's something everyone should have access to.
Hmm.
So that's why he made it accessible to everybody. And if I remember this correctly, from when he started making cars to 11 years later, he was selling 1 million cars a year.
In 11 years. Holy cow.
So yeah, he just understood processes so well. But
Yeah.
you should read his book. It's
Yeah.
called My Life and Work by Henry Ford.
My life of work
My Life and Work.
and work.
My life and work.
And he breaks down his philosophy of labor
Mm-hmm.
and what he thinks labor is for. Because you mentioned with homeless people, like
Yeah.
you take away the job, you kind of take away their humanity in a bit.
Mm-hmm.
He talks about that a lot. He said the worst thing he's ever seen is a man without a job.
It's bad.
He said it will destroy him.
Without purpose. Yeah.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
so he actually hired, I don't remember the numbers. It was crazy. It was like over 3,000 people that were maimed or were missing something.
Wow.
And
Yeah.
he would figure out parts of the job where they only needed one arm,
Yeah.
or they didn't need legs, or
Wow.
they could even work blind.
Wow.
And so he hired anybody
Mm.
that he thought would want a job. And he was testing out that theory of like mindless work. He's like, okay, I'll give the opportunity for people to work the same job for a better position. And they wanted their old job back where they didn't have to think. So
Yeah.
people want jobs to think and some where they
Some
don't.
don't.
Some people
Yeah.
don't want a job where you have to
Yeah.
think. That's very true.
Yeah.
It was so cool. And then he took it one step further. He made an orphanage school.
Mm-hmm.
So he took all the boys that didn't have parents, and he put them in the school, and they would make products for his cars.
Mhm.
So in school, they would
Yeah.
spend 2 weeks working and then 1 week in the classroom.
Interesting.
In 3 years, they would have a certificate to be either work in a Ford factory or be a dealer,
Wow.
mechanic.
Wow.
But the parts they would make in class, they
Yeah.
could sell to the factory and that would pay for their school. So they came out with money in their pocket,
Yeah.
school paid off with a certificate to work for Ford. And this was all early 20s. So like
Yeah.
when there wasn't any
Yeah.
sophistication really in understanding these things.
Mm-hmm.
And he was just rocking it.
Yeah. No.
Wow.
So cool.
Things like that.
We don't think there was sophistication, but we look back at
Yeah.
systems like that and realize
And
we
the pyramids, and
judge
we're like, oh.
we judge our ancestors in a way that's absolutely unfair.
Yeah.
Yes, history will not be kind to us
No.
when it realizes our willful disassociation with our own with the stream of human history that has
Mm.
brought us to this moment,
Mm-hmm.
and our willful disassociation from that.
It's just so cool because I listened to it at work one day and I was like, wow, this is, you'd think he was Catholic. He
Yeah.
might have been, I don't know. But like the way he was talking about it, like his whole thing was,
Mm-hmm.
he built his whole company on philosophy.
Mm-hmm.
And that's how he wanted to run it. And that's how he thought it should be run. And
That's really cool.
he really hated bankers.
I believe that.
So the only loan he ever had was $100,000. when he started up.
Mhm.
Everything else was his own money.
Wow. Wow.
And I have to look at the numbers, but
Mhm.
if you add up what his net worth was when he died, I think he's richer than most people today. Like he'd be worth like 200 billion today or something like that.
Okay.
Adjusted for inflation or okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So he'd be like 6 on the list.
Isn't that
5 or
crazy
6.
though?
Wow.
That's really remarkable.
Like you listen to him like, man, this guy was a genius, you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
Ugh.
I believe that.
Yeah.
I believe that.
Well, Carl, it's been an absolute pleasure to have you on, man.
Yeah, man, it has.
Yeah.
Been fun to be here.
We went in all sorts of directions I wasn't
We
expecting.
really did.
Yeah. We'll just have to have you back as soon as we can.
That'd be a blast.
That'd be fantastic.
Yeah.
Thanks for being here.
Thank you both.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. There literally are in China. Yeah.
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 Okay. Let them podcast. Yes.
Well, try to.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. I felt bad. Like, hey.
Like, where is every buddy? Like, hi.
Mhm. I like your drink combo there, Jonathan.
My milk and whiskey.
No.
Milk and whiskey.
Mm-hmm.
John, the podcast is over. Can you put my laundry in the dryer?
Laundry in the dryer. Laundry in the dryer. Copy that.
Why, thank you.
Yeah, we would.
Can't interrupt all the important things I have to say.
Carl's saying this, collect them and publish them in the book.
The
Make
Carlisms.
millions.
Yeah.
Then I'll sue you.
The chi of Carl. All right. I'm going to wait till I make millions before I yeah. I'm going to wait for you to make millions. Then I'll sue you.
Bump up. Okay, have fun, guys. Yeah.
Thanks, you too.
Can you just hit the 2 lights in the kitchen? That one and this one.
Yeah,
Mm.
this one has a
Yeah,
has a nice ambience.
Wow.
You guys film it too.
we are getting some ambiance.
We got to.
Whoa, dude, that's awesome.
Mine in there?
Yeah.
Just catch you out.
Just talking to the invisible. Just talking to the invisible voice.
Sounds like fun.
I may have started this one a little too early.
Did you? Oh, we're live
I went like 5 minutes ago.
5 minutes ago. So what have we talked about while we were live?
I think laundry.
Laundry. Okay. Yes. We're going to change my sister's laundry.
Checking.
Fact checking.
Yes.